Welcome to the Indie Maker Journey episode 2. On today's episode, Mario shares some of the updates he's been making to fusioncast. Spoiler, there's quite a lot of them. And how he made some of the decisions about those features. I talk a little bit about masking IDs in URLs, and I hassle Mario quite a lot about when he's going to launch his application. We also have a little chat about pricing and our thoughts on that. Here's our conversation. You never know what amazing nuggets of wonder we're going to speak, right?
Yep. Which is why there's a new feature on FusionCast. So we'll talk about it.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, we'll
so I noticed when I hit the login page, it's got a little notice saying that it's going to be recorded. So that's how nice. Yeah, I noticed that. So so that I guess leads into your next feature. So
yeah, it's part of the last few items that I've been working on. So as a result of the feedback that I got from 2-3 demos that I've done as of now, I got pretty good feedback from people that I onboarded. So I've been working on some of those items that they pointed out. So one of them was that, making it more obvious and making sure that there's a clear message in the beginning so they're aware that they're going to be recorded.
You don't suddenly end up like, hold on, what's going on? Actually, on the slight detour there, the URL that you've got, that gets sent out by email, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I don't think I got that right. So you almost want to because that's at the moment. I'm just wondering if that's because that's like an incremental guessable URL, I guess, right? But you still have someone's got to actually let you into the room. So I guess that's not a big deal. I was just wondering, I could go through and just hit 26, 25, 24, right? But of course, if there's no. You've got to let them into the room anyway, so it's not like somebody can get in without your permission, right?
Yeah, exactly. So all the rooms are locked by default, so no one can get in unless you let them in as the host. Someone asked that same question because the URL is so simple and so easy to manipulate. But if I've been thinking about that, so I don't know, and that's actually something I wanted to talk to you about and see what your opinion was, because
I noticed almost, especially the Indie Maker Journey itself as the root of the path, that almost you might want to redirect to the latest episode, or have something branded about your podcast on that page, right? Maybe some way of kind of making it because not knowing that last bit, I'd be like, I know I've got my initial instinct was to go to the URL without the number, thinking maybe that'll just redirect me, but obviously it didn't. Which is why, because I was like, I don't know which number we're at.
I see.
These are all minor things completely.
No, that's a good point though, because one of the ideas that I have is to create sort of like a profile page for the podcast, right? So that there's some basic information about the podcast, a link to their website for the podcast, or maybe some links to RSS feeds or the apps for listening or whatever, stuff like that. So, and maybe the name of the host, that kind of stuff. If they choose to make that public, FusionCast could have that profile there. So that's...
there'd be some contact details, or if, for instance, if I went to that, I'd be like, I know I've got a meeting with somebody. I can't remember, how to contact you. This could be some way of sending you a message or something on there, just as a one point of contact from that, maybe something like that.
That's a really good point.
And these are all such minor things in the context of getting the app working and launched. Right? But
that's a really good point. So regarding the URLs, so somebody else pointed that out as well, because it's an easy number. It's so simple, right? That someone could potentially start playing with it, guessing other numbers, but the farthest that they could get is just to the waiting room. If it's an active or I shouldn't say active, but if it's an available session that hasn't been archived, then the link is viable and they would get to the waiting room, but then they would have to request to join. So, and they can't go anywhere unless you let them in as a host. And if the session is archived, then they would get a 404 basically. Later I'm going to make
found that out as well.
make it pretty. And,
is it 10? Right.
So, but right now it's just a 404 because it's not a viable link anymore if it's archived.
as an aside, I kind of like had a similar but different issue with regards to URLs and numbers, right? So obviously I'm just using integer IDs in the database because UUIDs are a pain in the ass to maintain, and I don't want to store them, and developing with them is a nightmare anyway. So it's just kind of like I always prefer just using a standard integer ID, but that has the some would consider it an unwelcome side effect of giving away part of your schema of showing effectively what you're storing. One of the things being like, for instance, like my Twitter ID is a number that you can see in the HTML. It's it's publicly available, and that I think they've changed it now. But when it started off, it started at 1 and just incremented down like 5,000 or something.
Yeah.
And so obviously I've got users and check-ins on. They're displayable in the URL just as like you might be user 7, and obviously that kind of. I mean, it gives away that you're an early user, but it also gives away that, hold on, you've only got like 10 users, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to store a separate ID for each user and for each check-in that is like, well, this is its real ID, but this is what it's referenced by in the URL. That's kind of, I've got to auto-generate those. I've got to match them for collisions, and it's just an unnecessary, feels ugly. I actually was like, hold on, I want to kind of mask this in some way, but I don't want it to be an extra overhead and burden on the database, and I don't want to manage it and all the rest. So I found it's a really small, seems a reasonably standard library, as in there's standard in terms of the idea and the algorithm are standard, and it's across like every language you can ever think of, called HashID or Hashid. Okay. It's interesting. You basically give it a salt in your like root level config, and then you can give it integers. You can give it an integer or an array of integers, and it will create a unique hash of those integers that's decodable with your, effectively it's like a reversible crypted integers. Okay. So you can say you want a minimum size of the result. So you might say, okay, I want 5 characters. It uses base 64, so there's a high amount of data can be stored in it. It's reverse encryptable, so you can encrypt it when it goes or encode it when it goes into your URL. You decode it when you receive it. Mm-hmm. And that way you might have user ID 1, check-in ID 1. It's the first thing ever on the system, but it'll just be like XY732 in the URL. You get it, you just decode it. It's ultra lightweight and almost costs nothing to decode it, and just refer to everything with that. And because you can pass it an array of integers, you could say you've got user 1, and so say you've got user 1 and check-in 1. Mm-hmm. In theory, they would have the same hash ID because 1 hashed with your salt equals the same thing, right? But because you can encode it with an array, you can effectively say like user 1 is just the profile. Or if you were looking at a check-in view, it would be like organization ID and check-in ID. And so that would be a different hash ID than just 1, right? So in that way, I've basically masked all of the raw integers with effectively an encryption layer when it goes into the URL and a decryption when it gets it back. And it would take me like 5 minutes to do it across the whole site, and suddenly there's no IDs shown anywhere. It doesn't hit the database. It doesn't cost anything, a tiny amount in terms of CPU to do it, and it effectively removes that hackable URL. Obviously, it's still anybody can put anything in the URL, but and there's protection levels, obviously for who can see what, but it just removes that obvious thing of having the number in the URL, which is always a little bit like, I don't really want to expose that.
Yeah,
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. Do you have a link to that library?
Yeah, I think there's a page which actually, I think it's ids.org or Hashids. So it's got available in JavaScript, Ruby, Python, Scala, PHP, Perl, everything, literally every language you could ever throw at it. There's an implementation of it for. I think is it a GitHub thing? Yeah, it's from GitHub. So you got an S on the end. It's not HashID.
hashids.org.
It's interesting because the I is lowercase and the H is uppercase. I guess it's Hashids.
Hashids, yeah. Generate short unique IDs from integers.
Yeah. So it looks like a GitHub project, which is interesting. I guess they do something like that internally. So I thought it was a really neat little idea, and saves reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
And obviously, because your salt is private, it's, I guess it could be reverse engineered, but at the same time, what they're going to get 7 out of it. It's not exactly super secret information. If it's not something that needs securely encrypting, it's just something that you want to mask effectively. So I wouldn't use it for anything secure, but for masking an ID and a low number integer, then it's probably very handy. And obviously the string will just grow depending on how large the integer is. So if it's very large integers, then I guess you get a bigger one, but you can set a minimum size for it. So
Right. Cool. I'll look more into that. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. I'm going to see, hopefully it's as easy to do it in Laravel as it was for you.
Well, it says there's PHP implementation, so it was literally a one-liner for me to do it. Shockingly easy.
Yeah, nice. So, but when you pass the hashed version of the ID in the URL, so in your routes, because you have routes, right? So in your routes, when you receive that ID, you have to decode it, right?
So I'm just doing that I've got like a filter on the controller level. So at the moment, I'm just doing it in each controller, but Phoenix has this idea of plugs, so you can effectively set things which happen in the chain of processing an event. So I might look at see if it can be done at that level, but at the moment it's just a matter of like, here's what I get, here's the parameters I've received from the URL, just decode them. And then so I can just extract them from them, then use them in the rest of the controller methods. So,
but did you have to make changes in all your controllers that receive IDs?
Thankfully, I'm not using it in that many at the moment. There's only a limited number of pages that require those, but at the moment it was just like, okay, let's see how well this works, and then this works great. So I'm going to look at see if I can abstract it a little bit more into the so it's a little more transparent. At the moment, it's just each URL just encodes it when it gets put into the URL, and then it decodes it on receiving. So I say there's probably a nicer way of making it transparent, but for this level, I was just like, let's just try it, see if it works. Oh, right, that was easy.
Okay. Cool. I'll look into that and see if I can do that. And I wonder if it's, well, I guess if you do it for one, you can do it for all. But I wonder if it's worth the effort doing that as well for all the URLs that you have within the app behind the login. So once you log in and you're interacting with the app and visiting all these different URLs, I wonder if it's worth doing that there as well.
It depends on the use of your application, I guess. Because so for instance, mine, because it's multi-tenanted and you've got, in theory, hundreds, thousands of different companies using it, each one with multiple different users and each person having a unique ID. It's kind of like, okay, I'm user 107 and your user 180, or 100 who's your user 108. It feels like you're giving away a little bit too much of your database, right? You're exposing a bit of, whereas it might not make as much of a difference. Yours, I guess the context of the people using it made me feel that it's just something I didn't want leaking into the URL. And I'm saying I didn't want the overhead of doing it at the database level, which is just but it might make sense. Even yours, you could just put it on the external URL to start off with and see how you felt about it.
I'll make sure I bookmark this so that I don't lose it later.
One of those things that I was kind of like, okay, I'm not sure what I'm going to do about this, and then after 15 minutes, I found that, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's perfect. I literally don't have to, change my schema. I don't have to do anything at the database level. I don't have to, it's minimum changes in the code. And, the router still just sees an ID passing through. It's just a string ID, and it just doesn't care. So it's purely at the controller level. It's like, well, what do I do with this ID? Well, it's not a number. I have to decode it first.
Yeah, because one way that I've done it before, and I was considering doing that with this, if I wanted to mask that ID, is just adding a UUID to the database. So another column, and then auto-generate those every time that a model is entered. And then use that in the URL, which means when on the receiving end, I would have to look up that entity by that UUID as opposed to the real ID, and just use it for lookup purposes, basically.
I guess the downside of there is UUIDs are generally horribly long, right? It's I forget how many bits. It's a big string, and it's a pain to copy, cut and paste when you're kind of doing stuff. It's not something somebody can type in. I mean, I pretty much typed in this URL and just stuck a number at the end, right? And it's also an extra database index, which has to
Yep.
be, it takes up space, and
Yep.
they'd say that was my default, kind of go-to. It's like, I guess I have to do that. And then it's like, well, actually, I just use the same primary key. I don't change anything in the schema. It's just that, right?
Yeah. And I do have a couple of areas where I am using a UUID, but it's only because I'm using it instead of the regular ID, and only because it's a table that the rows are deleted constantly, so
Okay. Right.
so the rows get discarded once they're used, and
Right.
so I don't want
it's kind of like that's your queue for processing kind of thing. So stuff's going in and getting deleted, and kind of it's just having
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't want to be generating the auto increment ID and then at some point run out of IDs,
right.
which would be in the billions or whatever. But
Still,
but if that's happening a lot, it could,
high churn on that table, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to have to worry about that at some point in the future. So I just did UUID. And there's one area that I should have done that, and I haven't done that yet. I need to go back and change that. But in that case, I think it's justifiable, I guess, to use
I would
UUID.
say that's just fine.
To use it as an actual ID.
I mean, you're using that as kind of it's almost like just a key value store, not a traditional database table, right? You just stuff it. I mean, that you could do that in Redis or something, where you're just stuffing it in and getting it back and deleting and discarding it when it's used, right? It's not it's a temporary store. It's not a real like database, traditional use of a database table, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I think that makes sense in that case.
Yeah. So what else can I share with you? I made a bunch of changes.
So how many people did you onboard is my question.
So I've onboarded 3 so far.
Hey, excellent.
And I have the 4th one tomorrow, actually.
So how many of them are paying yet?
None of them are paying yet. Not yet.
Well, let them get hooked into it first, right?
Yeah. So, I don't even have the billing set up yet. So there's no way they can pay me yet.
Why do you think I'm having a 1 month free trial? So it's like, give me a chance to set up billing, right?
Yeah, I don't have that set up yet. So based on their feedback, I've been making a bunch of changes. A couple of them you can see up at the top. There's 2 indicators now letting you know when backup recording is happening and when local recording is happening.
Right. That's nice.
So that's one of them. Kind of minor, but I think it's going to be pretty useful.
I think you can't really overstate how important it is, I think, to make it clear that it's being recorded or it's busy, because obviously most cases you just assume that it's working, whereas in this case you kind of want that double check, triple check. I'm definitely recording this. It's local, it's backed up, it's all good, right? So I think that's completely justifiable, and that makes sense. It's nice and clear. Also, I like it being at the top because you're generally looking towards the top of the screen anyway, so it's kind of that little reminder that all is good, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So one of my goals is to keep the most important things near the top. And it's one of the reasons why the 2 video panels are at the top and there's a lot of space at the bottom. But the closer to the camera they are, the better, because that's where your eyes should be, and then it creates that effect that it's a little closer to the camera.
I've understood why Skype always throws your picture in the bottom right corner, right?
At the bottom,
it makes no sense. Zoom obviously sticks it right in the middle at the top, which is like, hold on, why has nobody ever done this before? This is so obvious. You're looking at generally the top of the screen anyway, right?
So, most cameras, you're going to have it either. If it's a laptop, it's built at the top.
Monitors at the top, exactly.
Monitors at the top, or even if you have a webcam and you clip it on top of the monitor, it's going to be at the top. So that's why I purposely keep the video panels near the top. So that's one of the changes. The other one, let's see, I have a list here. There is a auto recording feature that is flag driven at the podcast level. So when you create your podcast or you edit your podcast settings, you can set a flag that says auto start recording for every session in this podcast. So whenever someone joins a session for that podcast, it'll start recording automatically.
At least you've got your, that's something you can do as a per podcast level. So if you think, okay, I just want to enable it. Is that per podcast or per episode?
Per podcast.
Per podcast. Okay.
Yeah, I figure. So I went back and forth between that, whether to do it per session or per podcast. And I think I ended up, actually, my wife and I explained to my wife what I was trying to do, and then she helped me figure it out. And so we concluded that based on the feedback and the nature of the feature, it seems like if someone as a podcast host wants that kind of functionality, they're going to want it for everything. They're going to want it, for the whole podcast, for every
you either want
session
it or you don't. You either think that's a good idea or you don't, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if I made it at the session level, then that means every time they create a session, they have to go in there and set the flag or turn it on, turn it off, or turn it on. That can get kind of annoying. And if that's something they want, they're going to want it for everything. They're going to want
exactly.
it.
Either you want that or you think that's a bad idea and you don't want it, right?
So exactly. I also went back and I had left certain parts of the app for later, and that later finally came. And
it caught up with you, right?
It caught up with me. So in a bunch of different parts of the app, whenever I'm deleting an entity, I was just deleting it from my database, for example, recordings, but I wasn't going out to storage in the cloud, deleting those. So
they're getting bigger, right?
and so before it was just me testing and, creating stuff, deleting stuff. And so I could just, whenever I wanted, just go into the cloud and just wipe everything out because it's just me. But now that I'm onboarding people, if they start recording, I don't want to have that become a mess, where
because then you're like, hold on, which ones can I get rid of or not?
It would be a headache, trying to reconcile that. So went in and I added that functionality everywhere where whenever you delete recordings or sessions or a podcast, that everything is handled appropriately and everything is deleted in the cloud. So that's in. The other thing is little notifications or kind of like a tooltip when you mute the mic, for example. If you mute the mic, it'll show you that it's muted. Before it would only show you the icon with the line across.
Right.
But now it shows you a little tooltip kind of thing. Nice. So it's a little more obvious.
Right?
Yeah. Nice. So I did that for the mic, for the camera, and for screen sharing as well.
Right. Oh, nice. Cool.
Yeah. So just little details like that.
You're running out of excuses to launch now. Do you know that?
I know, right?
It's a bit scary, isn't it?
I know.
It's like, okay, I've got no excuse anymore.
Yeah. Let's see, what's the other one? The biggest one that I'm still working on has to do with screen sharing. Right now, when you do screen sharing, so actually, let me share a screen here with you so we can talk about that. It'll make more sense. Right now, I'm sharing my screen, but you can't see me, right? You can only see my screen. Yeah. So the issue with that is that I did that for a couple of reasons. Let's see, how can I explain this? So there's a limitation of the number of participants within the studio, right? So as of right now, it supports up to 4 participants. That includes any screen share. So if let's say there's 4 people, that's already maxed out. And if someone wants to do a screen share, then I wouldn't be able to, because that would become a 5th participant. Right. Basically, a screen share is like another participant.
Of course, yeah. So if you've got 4 and then somebody screens it, is the 5th one is like going to break everything.
Yeah, so it won't work. Yeah. So that for that reason, to get around that, I remove the participant's camera video and then I replace it with the screen share. And so that keeps the limit without a problem. So if we have 4 and then someone wants to screen share, then their camera video gets removed and the screen share is it's replaced with the screen share. That worked just fine for now, but some of the feedback that I got was it would be nice to be able to just still be able to see each other even when the screen is being shared. So I went ahead and made a bunch of changes. I upped the limit to actually 6 participants instead of 4.
So the 4, I was going to say, so you could have effectively them, you can't add more people, but they can share, right?
Yeah. So I took that opportunity to, since I was going to have to mess with the code in that area anyways, I upped the limit to 6 instead of 4. So now fusioncast is going to be able to handle up to 6 participants, but it really is 7. Behind the scenes, the limit is really 7 to accommodate screen sharing without having to remove the participants' video.
Nice. So you could effectively have 6 people plus a screen share.
Exactly. And that feature is not live yet. I'm still working on it. So
that would effectively record 2 streams locally. It would record my video plus my screen share locally. So not locally, but it would upload those as well, right? So you'd end up with however many files of each camera plus that. So if you're editing, you can effectively, inlay that, or you could do stuff with it as well, right?
Yeah. So although right now that's the goal, but right now when you do screen sharing, that doesn't get recorded locally. It gets
Oh, okay.
recorded as a backup in the cloud, but
Right.
it doesn't get recorded locally.
Okay.
But that would be the next iteration to create a separate
Wow.
track with the screen share.
See, you're going beyond MVP now. Do you know that?
I know.
That's not good. That shouldn't stop you from launching. That's
Yeah.
a cool
No,
feature.
I'm not gonna work on that for
It's like,
launching.
well, I can't launch until that, right?
No. That'll be later down the road. For now, it's fine the way it is.
Yeah.
But
Cool.
the main goal was to allow people to still see each other as they're doing screen share. And at the same time, I took the opportunity to up the limit to 6. The problem, though, is that the more participants you support, then the harder it gets to accommodate everything on the screen. And screen sharing is kind of tricky with the different aspect ratios of the screen. So if you're sharing an entire screen, it's going to be, depending on what kind of screen the user has, it could be an ultra wide, or it could be more of a regular kind of screen. So the aspect ratio is a big pain in the neck. And I've been struggling with that. And today, actually, I was like, man, just, so far I haven't been very successful with it. I even started getting a little headache today.
Yeah, that sounds like something to put on the back burner and let it tick away. And then when you're ready to think about it again, that's an awkward one for sure.
Yeah, I wanted you to see the screen sharing as it is now, because if you noticed, when I share my screen, it stays as a small little video panel, right? And then if you want to see it, you have to maximize it.
Hit the thing,
hit the button and maximize so you can see it better. So one of the things that I'm doing, since I'm working in that whole area, is also changing that layout automatically. So when someone shares the screen, it automatically comes up bigger on your screen, and each video panel of the participants becomes small, and then the screen share is bigger. So I'm working on all of that, and it's a pain.
Yes, that sounds not fun.
It's a pain, just dealing with the grid layout and shifting things around depending on what the aspect ratio is of the screen that's being shared and all that. Exactly. Oh man.
Yeah, I don't envy you there. That does not sound fun.
It's not. It's a pain in the neck, but yeah, I'll figure it out at some point.
Yes.
But that's really all I've been working on, and
so what's the next step? Since you got like 3 people using it now, so what's the next step for actual launch?
So my idea was to onboard a few more. So with the first few that I invited, I've gotten pretty good feedback, and so I'm iterating on those and trying to build that into the product so that when I demo it for other people, those improvements are already there.
Those issues aren't going to come up again, right? Because you've solved them.
Exactly.
It's naturally incremental feedback.
Exactly. So those are already there. And so my goal is to invite another set of maybe five people, to the demo, do the whole thing, and hopefully get even more feedback from them. So I want to do that for at least another batch. And
another batch.
Yeah. At some point, I need to integrate the whole billing system, figure out
you're using
pricing and all that. Yeah, I'm using OutSetup.
Yeah. So are you using their authentication stuff?
No,
as well?
I have my own. Yeah. Okay. I have my own sign up and my own authentication, but I can still do billing through them.
Okay.
So I'm planning to do that. But that means figuring out pricing, figuring out, all this stuff.
Yeah.
So,
I know that's one of the things I looked at, because I'm probably gonna use Paddle. I looked at Outsetter. I had a few conversations with them. I think it would work, but I think Paddle's a little bit more aligned with just how I'm expecting to build people for it. But I might change my mind. But at the moment, Paddle seems the most in line with what I kind of need right now. And they've got a sandbox, and so I created an account in the sandbox, and suddenly it's like, define your subscription, and I'm like, oh god, I have to think about this again. Right. I've been going back and forward between, the default in like the B2B SaaS industry is this price per month per user, like $9, $5, whatever per user per month. And I'm wary of doing that. One, I just, having been in small companies, who obviously I'm kind of targeting first, it suddenly becomes this issue where people think, we don't need them to have an account because it'll cost us $9. And it's like, what the hell, it's $9. But it does create this like haves and haves not. And the whole point of my app is that everybody in the team can have empathy and share what they're doing with everybody else. Not like, well, only the people who are worth it use it and those other people don't. So I'm kind of, I think I've decided to go for a few tiers of, up to 20 or up to 50, and then, however many, just to remove that resistance to giving everybody an account, and obviously keep those low enough that it doesn't stop a team of 5 saying, well, hold on, we don't need 20, that's a bit too much. So the price should be still low enough that they don't feel they're getting ripped off, but they know they can grow without going into the next level. So I think that's what I'm tending towards, just because the per person per month model, I've seen it's nothing, right? But I've also seen these discussions happen at reasonably large companies, and it's like, really, you care? They do. So I want to remove that, especially at this stage of the business. I don't want to lose a customer just because they're worried about adding an extra 3 people.
Right. Right. Oh, that's good. That's probably
it's. I've been thinking about it for months now, and it was kind of like a barrier that I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to charge per month for at least batches of users. So I haven't made that decision this week, I think.
No, that's good. I think that's a smart way to do it. That's the way to go.
So you're intending on pricing per, what was your brackets of pricing?
Yeah, so I still have to figure that out, but I've been thinking about the fact that for the nature of my app, a usage-based pricing, I think it makes more sense, because there's a lot of cost involved. Or, I mean, I shouldn't say a lot, but there's cost involved.
The more people record, the more it costs you, right?
The more it costs to run the system. There's storage, there's data transfer for video and uploading everything to the cloud.
There's a lot of additional costs in your compared to mine.
So there's push notifications and all of that costs, because I'm using different systems for that kind of stuff. So I think usage-based pricing makes more sense, but I don't want to nickel and dime users. So I think I need to figure out what would be a good level of cost that equates to what the user has used in the system, right? And then come up with some kind of package deal that kind of makes sure that it covers my cost plus some profit. And then
you kind of want to know what a normal type of user is, and then you want to know what a serious user is, and then that's kind of my thinking, right? You've got smaller normal kind of users, you've got the bigger users, and then you've got the extreme. So you kind of want
come
to
up with some
make
kind
it
of average.
So if you're in that normal kind of use case, it's not going to cost you a crazy amount. It's a well within your limit. You probably won't even hit the limit, right? But if you have a different use case, you will hit that limit, and you kind of happier to go into the next tier, right? So.
Exactly. So I need to come up with those tiers: low usage kind of user, and then medium, and then higher, and then create packages based on that. There would have to be something in the system keeping track of usage, of course, and applying some limitations to what they can do
if it's number of minutes or number of sessions or whatever that limit is, right?
And I think a number of minutes is probably what makes most sense.
Because that's the thing which actually costs you money, right?
Exactly. So the number of minutes translates into more storage, more video data transfer, and all that stuff. So a lot of it is going to be based on number of minutes, I think.
And that's a more difficult thing to track than number of sessions, right?
Yeah. Because you could have a bunch of small sessions, like 15-minute sessions, or 20, 30-minute sessions, or you could have.
If there's no limit on the length of a session, right?
There is no limit. For all practical purposes, there is no limit, but there is a 4-hour limit. A hard
limit, right?
Yeah, a hard. Because there has to be some kind of limit. So
of course, yeah.
right,
Someone forgets to close their browser, and it's like, hold on.
yeah.
Tomorrow
So
you wake up and you're like, ah.
yeah, exactly. So there's a hard limit of 4 hours, but I doubt anyone's gonna hit that.
I say it's more likely that they'd hit it accidentally than intentionally. It's more of a
And
protection for the user and for your wallet than anything
yeah,
else.
yeah. So there's that limit, and I guess I need to inform the user, and they need to be aware of that. But most likely, no one's gonna hit that really.
Yeah.
I don't really see anyone recording for 4 straight hours.
I have trouble for an hour.
Yeah. So the other thing is, right now I have a very basic infrastructure supporting the system. I only have one server. I only have one database. So I would like to beef that up a little bit before I go into public beta, because right now it's okay with a limited number of people that I'm onboarding. But if I open it up to the public, I want to have a load balancer with at least 2 servers behind.
Yeah.
And I want to have replication, in database replication.
I mean, I think some form of kind of early access where people can apply to use it at least will give you control. I mean, the hope is that you've got a queue of 100 people waiting to use it, right? But at least you then can let them in a few at a time without opening the floodgates for potentially a lot more, right? Because I mean, you hope that you're going to get flooded, and the reality is probably not. But at least having, if you do get some additional traffic, then you don't want to fall over, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at the minimum, your database is probably the one that's worth having a little bit of extra behind. I guess your application server you can scale vertically reasonably easily quickly, right?
Yeah.
But at least having a database failover makes sense, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's all progression. No, it's looking really good. I mean, it's just working now. Considering when we first started, it was like, okay, it's not working.
It's not working.
And now this is a product. This is excellent. It's looking really good. Everything's looking,
awesome.
And it's just working so well now that I would encourage you to get it as open as soon as possible, or at least start thinking about that, trickling people in outside of the immediate close onboarding people. There could well be a few externals that you start letting in soon. Exciting. It's looking really good. And I say billing, you can always just send them an email and say, can you put this in my PayPal? You'd be good. Well, I mean, one of the things I considered here is if I'm billing for Japanese companies, the chances are they'll probably just want an invoice and pay it by bank transfer anyway. So it's if their customer's local, obviously, I'd much prefer they just went through a credit card, but it's quite likely that they wouldn't want to here, just because it's the normal method of payment for any business use is a bank transfer. So, which is something I also had to consider, because I don't want the overhead of dealing with that either. So can you just use a credit card, please? It's easier for me.
So, nice.
So my interesting news, as you saw, was my little pitch. So that was a fun thing, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about that. We talked enough about fusioncast.
we can split your conversation in half, right?
Yeah.
Actually, that's as a side, that's actually something that isn't a bad idea, because I was listening to Software Social. I don't know if you've listened to that podcast.
I know of it. I haven't listened to it, but I know
it's a really it's a fun listen, and they bring up some interesting topics regularly, because they're both at very different stages of their startup life. So there's some interesting kind of dynamic there. Whereas we're kind of almost at a similar point in terms of launching. There's definitely some interesting discussions going on, but they're always around about 30 minutes. And knowing that is so much easier to, I'll just put that on because it's only 30 minutes, as opposed to it's an hour, I'll save that for later. So, I mean, there's always the possibility that we could effectively be, if we're doing this every 2 weeks, talking, then that's effectively 2 or 3 episodes in theory, right? You could divvy it up and spread it out weekly, say, without worrying about, hold on, there's every few weeks, do we have enough? You could keep it going at a regular schedule, even by only recording every 2 weeks or something. So that's a possibility, because not all, the things we're talking about are not as timely as, this happened yesterday. It doesn't matter if it happened a week ago, right?
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah,
that could be an interesting thing to do is effectively, and I say we just start shipping. We've got no excuse here either. Do you know that? Apart from we actually just need to tell everybody what our products are. That's our only excuse. Do you know that? We should do it.
No, I know. I agree. And that would normally, I think we've been recording about a little over an hour. So if we split it, then it becomes around 30 minutes episode. And so that would make it a little more digestible. I think 30 minutes are really good. It's a good length.
Exactly. It's digestible and it's better schedule. I mean, releasing once a week is much better than releasing every 2 weeks, right? Just because it's it keeps that cadence going, which is important, right? So I think that's something we might be worth doing.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll look into that.
And that's exactly what we decided to do. So if you want to listen to the rest of that conversation, that'll be on the next episode. Thanks for listening.